So Ruth did a lot of very interesting things in this garden that in a way were kind of revolutionary in garden design or in the way that people thought about gardens at the time. One of those elements is the pond. So having a water feature in a dry garden may seem counter to a lot of people, but it actually provides a sense of respite. You think of an oasis in the desert, right? It provides something that's cool and there's a lovely sound to it, and it's a place to get away from the heat of the plants. And Ruth's Pond here is a beautiful example of that. It's also a very popular feature here in the garden, and you can replicate that in your own garden by having a fountain and recycling that water and just thinking about how you use water. It's not about not using water at all, but being very intentional about how you use it. And using something like a pond is a very good example of that. Some of the other things that Ruth did was mounding. We have very hard packed clay soil here in Walnut Creek. And by creating these mounds, she was able to grow a much more diverse palette of plants that are otherwise very climate appropriate, but need that sharp drainage. And that's something that anybody can do in their home as well. If they have poor soil or polluted soil, by creating those mounds, you can have a much more diverse plant palette. In terms of the plant palette, a lot of the interest in the garden comes from the diversity of the plant palette and the way that those plants are combined. So when people think of gardens, they often think of interest coming from the flowers. But here, although there is something always in bloom at the Ruth Bancroft Garden, a lot of the interest comes from the combination of textures and colors of the leaves. And that's something that Ruth was really good at seeing and interpreting and applying, and it is throughout the entire garden. Another element that you can have in your home garden, and we see a lot here, is the use of boulders. This is a naturalistic garden. She really wanted it to look, although it is an artificial environment, to actually mimic a natural environment. And so the paths blend into the beds. And then within the mounds, within those beds, there are these large boulders. That's something you see in nature, in the desert. And so by replicating that, you get that natural feel in this not natural environment. And lastly, I think that one of the things that you can easily incorporate and often should be thinking about when you design a garden at home is the borrowed view. Ruth did a lot of borrowed views when she laid out this garden and laid out the plantings, and it's something that makes you feel like the garden is even bigger than it is, and it creates a sense of place, and it also relates the garden to the surrounding area. So lots of different little tips that are really wonderful to enjoy here and easy to apply at home.